All right, so we're supposed to be looking at May 2025 diet downwards to November 2014, and one of us prompted we should start from the top to bottom. So we're looking at from May 2025 downwards. From what you've seen on my screen, May 2025 did not test any concept on planning. So November 2024, if you look at the Pathfinder, you see it tested some questions on chapter 7, which was planning. All right. So question 1, which is the A part of November 2024, if you look at that Pathfinder, you will see that it tested materiality. So let me go through the question and we speak to it. We share some thoughts on how to answer such a question. And the question 1 is on Ichadaba and Co. Chartered Accountants. And the question reads, you are a manager in Ichadaba and Co. Chartered Accountants and responsible for the audit of Prohome Group of Companies. The group's main activity is engineering, metal fabrication, and related businesses. The company comprises the parent company and 3 subsidiaries. Your firm currently audits all the components of the group. Work is currently ongoing on the audit of the group's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2020. When you opened your email box this morning, you saw the following note that was left for you by the audit engagement partner. Hello. The audit senior has provided the draft consolidated financial statements with the accompanying notes, which summarize the key audit findings and some background information. At the planning stage, materiality was initially determined to be 950,000 naira and was calculated based on the assumption that Prohome Group is a high-risk client. Excuse me. Prohome Group is a high-risk client due to its listed status. During the audit, a number of issues including indicators that certain management estimates may not have been properly recorded in terms of the relevant accounting standards arose. This meant that we needed to revise the materiality level for the financial statement as a whole. The revised materiality level is now as 650,000. So it was dropped from 950 to 650. Take note of that. One of the audit juniors was unsure as to why materiality level has been revised. The key audit findings on the group financial statements are in the attached notes. Thank you. The notes. Number 1, revenue has been stable for all the components of the group, with the exception of Corps Mink Company Limited, which witnessed a 25% decrease in revenue. 2, operating expenses figure for the year ended June 30th, 2022 is showing a profit on a property disposal of 2 million. Our evidence includes agreeing the cash receipts to bank statements and sale documentation. And we've confirmed that the property has been removed from the non-current assets register. The audit junior noted when reviewing the sales documents that there is an option to repurchase the property in 5 years' time, but did not discuss the matter with management. Number 3, the property revaluation gain of 800,000 in the income statement related to the revaluation of a property at the group's head office. The audit team has not obtained evidence on the revaluation as the gain was immaterial. Also, the actual losses on defined benefit plan of 1.1 million are attributed to an unexpected stock market crash. The group's pension plan is managed by Axial Company, a firm of independent fund managers who maintain the necessary accounting records relating to the plan. Axial Company has supplied written representation as to the value of defined benefit plans, assets and liabilities of June 30th, 2022. No other audit work has been performed other than agreeing the amount reported in the financial statements in the supporting documentation supplied by Axial Group. The goodwill of 5.350 relates to the subsidiaries in the group. Management has confirmed in writing that the goodwill is correctly stated, and our other audit procedure was to arithmetically check the impairment review conducted by management. There is an investment in associated company of 4.230 million, which is a 30% holding in Family Company Limited, purchased to provide investment income. The audit team has not obtained evidence regarding the associate, as there is no movement in the account recognized in the statement of financial position as at the year end. The non-current asset held for sale of 7.8 million in the draft financial statements relate to trading division of one of the subsidiaries, which represent 1/3 of that subsidiary's net asset. The sale of the division was announced in May 2022 and is expected to be completed by December 2022. Audit evidence obtained includes a review of the sales agreement and confirmation from the buyer obtained in July 2022, which indicated that the sale would take place. Number 7, two of the group subsidiaries are owned partly by shareholders outside the group. Number 10, a loan of 8 million was obtained in October 2021 at an interest rate of 20% payable annually in arrears. The terms of the loan has been confirmed to the documentation provided by the bank. There was no repayment of the loan in the books as at the year end required. Discuss the justification for the need of reassessment of materiality as the audit progresses. 6 marks. So that's the question that tested materiality, ladies and gentlemen. A long read, but I had to run through that very briefly. So that question tested materiality, and it's a question that is quite, will I say, a start of how we should be able to reach out to the question on planning. So you'll see that the topic is on materiality, which is ISA 320, and specifically the need for revision and how materiality relates to the overall risk assessment was what was tested generally. If you look at the first statements around at the planning stage, materiality was initially determined to be 900, blah, blah. One of the audit juniors was unsure why materiality has been revised. So we spoke about that extensively in the lectures, and you see that the question focused on the why behind revising materiality, down to when new risk information, poor management estimates emerged during the audit. We won't be looking at those estimate questions until we come to that topic. So the answer quality, it's very important. Our answer quality is key. If you look at the answer on the screen, the answer quality is key because the Pathfinder, it's comprehensive. It aligns perfectly with ISA 320 requirements, and it correctly includes the definition, the purpose of setting materiality, and the multiple valid triggers for revision. So let's look at the examiner's report and see what he said. Okay, so the examiner's report explicitly mentions the lack of understanding of materiality assessments and ISA 540 accounting estimates. So the revision is a question, or the revision in the question is indirectly linked to the indicators that management estimates were poor, suggesting inherent or increased inherent risks, and thus requiring a lower, more conscious materiality level. So the understanding of materiality assessment was poor for candidates. So please take note of it as we look through the question from his report, or the average. Okay, he said the performance was average. Okay, the process test. All right. Okay, average. Okay. All right, it's average, not poor. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then we need to harness and refine-tune our understanding, and also redevelop our understanding of the materiality concept. Okay, so let's speak to the answer on how and what to write. Don't forget, you need to understand what to write and how to write it. Somebody's trying to interject. You have a thought? Okay, I thought somebody's trying to interject. Please interject freely if you have any concerns. Okay, so what to write and how to write it. The requirement asks for us, the prompt asks us to, let's look at the prompt again. Discuss. So we have to discuss the justification. So that's the prompt. Our prompt is to discuss the justification. So in discussing the justification, we need to start with a brief, accurate definition of materiality first, then how to structure it. Use just a concise open statement in defining materiality, as you can see the examiner did. And You need to focus on why the initial level might become inappropriate, especially in the context of risk changes. That's what to write. Focus on why the initial level might become inappropriate. That's why it needs a reassessment, especially in the context of risk changes. And in how to write that, use clear bullet points like the examiner did. Use clear bullet points on numbered list for separate justifications. For example, new information could be a reason. Change in circumstances, actual result versus what was forecasted are reasons for changes. So state that unequivocally. Then the risk link is very important. Crucially link the revision, especially a downward revision, like we saw in this case, to the discovery of increased risk. For example, detection risk of poor management judgment or estimates. So explain that the lower figure is a more conscious figure or cautious figure necessary to achieve an appropriate low audit risk. So revising it from 950 to 650 is much more realistic in the assessment of the auditors. So in explaining your answer, we need to explain that it's a more cautious figure necessary to achieve the appropriate low audit risk. Try to also mention ISA 320 explicitly and include the role of performance materiality in answering your question. And also try to integrate like performance materiality naturally in your answers. Those are the key ISAs that guides materiality generally in answering this question and the subject we've looked at in the AAA paper or the Chapter 7 planning paper generally. So that's what to write. So you can see the answer they give us. The examiner gave us a good number of points, about 6 of them. So that should guide how we answer this. So general strategies for earning such marks. It's how many mark question? Now it's a 6-mark question. So however this is blown out in another question, you should be able to answer questions generally. And these strategies I mentioned or have been mentioning in answering such questions are applicable to all questions. So the first one I will say is try to use ISA headers, numbers in your discussion. So whenever a topic relates to an international standard, for example, ISA 320, 540, 600, cite the standard number as you are practicing. This immediately shows the examiner you are using the correct professional framework. This is very important. So try to use the ISAs as you practice. Practice makes perfect to make you remember under exam condition. Then try to use or avoid professional jargon or use professional jargon correctly, especially in the audit. You need to use professional terms. Yes, please. Omolara, go ahead. Martinuke, I can see your hand. Please go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Okay, sorry, I just want to ask a question based on what you just said now.
Okay.
As regards using ISAs, like ISA 315 and that.
Yeah.
Now, in a situation where, because one thing I used to hear is that when you don't, at least some of the lecturers that I've met in the past, they will say when you don't, that if you can't really say it the way it is, that is better you don't refer to, let's say, by you saying that in accordance to ISA 315, and I know what it means, but I can't really specify it the way it's being written. Won't that mean I'm shooting myself on the leg if I can't really specify the way it's written and I'm still mentioning the ISAs? I just want to be sure.
Okay, so that's a good question. And under exam condition, if you remember the ISA and the number, you see there are explicit and direct definitions quoting verbatim, and that's as a result of memorization, regurgitation of the concept. And there are also implied way of saying ISA 320 according to ISA 320 using your words verbatim. So explicitly, you can state directly from the framework. Impliedly, you can also state. So I don't think, in my opinion, you'll be shooting yourself directly if you impliedly quote the standard. You may not be able to, under exam condition, quote it verbatim. But I think under exam condition, if you say ISA 315, ISA 320 on materiality, states blah 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 blah, and you didn't quote it verbatim, you are able to imply and apply that case scenario to what you are saying. I don't think you'll be penalized. I don't think you'll be shoot yourself in the leg. I think where you shoot yourself in the leg is maybe saying ISA, according to ISA 315, materiality is not ISA 315. I think that's where you shoot yourself in the leg. And let me say this: if you don't remember the ISA, don't quote it. Answer the question. But if you remember the ISA 320 on materiality, for example, please go ahead and impliedly state what it says based on the case. But if you don't remember the standard, no issues. Go ahead and speak to materiality. So in answer your question expressly, I don't think you'll be penalized if you quote the ISA correctly and impliedly say what the ISA meant in that scenario. I don't think you'll be penalized. I, as an examiner, will even give you some credit. At least you're able to code the ISA and impliedly inject the answer into the scenario.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. I think I understand what you're saying. So I
All
will
right.
avoid
All
using
right.
in accordance. Thank you.
Yes, please. Yes, please. You're welcome. So let's try to practice these ISAs so that we remember them under exam condition. So good question. Good question. Okay. So any other contribution? Any questions? Please bring them on and let's speak to them. Okay. So like I said, I was speaking to the fact that lost my thoughts now. Okay. So I was speaking to the fact that you need to try to remember the IS. It's okay. I was talking about professional jargon. Pardon me. So I said professional jargons could be used correctly. So you use terms like risk of material misstatement, performance materiality in your answer, sufficient appropriate audit evidence. You can remember that sufficient appropriate evidence with an acronym, SAAE, something like that. Those acronyms help. Assertions accurately. So those kind of jargons in answering questions, in putting them in your answers, just earns you the mark. It doesn't allow the examiner read through your answers, like you can see on the screen. So some of those technical jargons or words, phrases help drive your point and gets you the marks very seamlessly. So try to also apply to the scenario what you are answering. Never give a generic study text answer. Don't do that under a case study question. If the question is case based, and in this case, mention the initial high risk status and the figures and the poor management estimates as a reason for you revising the materiality, for changing it as the answers provided. Then try to also structure your answer and make it clear. Use clear, well spaced bullet points or numbered list. Use headers or headings for multiple part questions. Start in another line. Don't jumble them together. A point per paragraph, especially in discussion questions, is highly effective. So please, structure is king, like I used to say. Then focus on the why. The AAAF paper often asks why or discuss. Why or discuss. So the best marks are awarded for explaining the underlying professional reasoning, not just listing facts. So explain the underlying professional reasoning behind the why or discussion. So focus on discussing very pragmatically. Okay, so let's go to the marking key and speak to the marking key. Be conscious, the mark conscious. So it's a 6-mark question, and the definition of materiality is 1 mark. So state that materiality is the magnitude, like we said in the lecture, materiality is the magnitude of an omission or misstatement that individually or in aggregate could influence the economic decision of users taken on the basis of the financial statement. So that definition is 1 mark. Try to memorize and practice with that. Then for the discussion on the need for materiality, 1 mark each for any 5 marks. So the change in risk perception is the first reason. And the change in risk perception speaks to the initial high risk assessment may have been underestimated. as suggested by the poor estimates, leading to a lower, more conservative materiality to reduce detection risk. So that's one mark. Then for the second one, new information is a reason for changing the figures or changing a materiality threshold. New facts were discovered, for example, during the audit. For example, poor quality of management estimates as per ISA 540 requirements. Another reason is actual versus forecast, like we saw in the answer. The actual results or composition of the financial statements may differ significantly from the preliminary figures during the audit plan. And number four, another reason is need for caution. A downward revision from 950 to 600 increases the scope and depth of audit work, making it more likely the auditor will find misstatements and thus ensuring the overall audit risk remains at an acceptable low level. And five is qualitative factors is another reason for the change. Awareness of a matter like poor management estimates may indicate the misstatements below or the misstatements we saw could be qualitatively material. For example, relating to management integrity or compliance with standards, something like that. Then for performance materiality, which is another reason, the revision affects the overall materiality, which in turn requires a subsequent revision to performance materiality. And you see that the benchmark used for testing for individual accounts is what we did in this revision. So generally, if you state 5 of the 6 provided, you should be able to get 5 marks based on what is. So as you are practicing and you are reading the slides or your study text, please practice with this question and try to write it, memorize it in your own words. This is very important. Okay, so that's the question on the materiality, tested materiality in November 2024. That was question 1A. That was question 1A explicitly. So do we have any questions, observations, contributions to that question so that we can run to the next question? Any question? Okay, so please feel free to bring them on once you have any concern, any thoughts. Please share freely and let's all learn from each other. Okay, so let's run. The next one is question 3 in that same November, and it tested government parastatal. And remember, we had public sector audits in that same chapter. We had public sector audits in the 7th chapter of planning. So the question 3 was on government parastatal, and the question reads, government parastatal you work for has received a new board of directors, including the promotion of the deputy management director or managing director to acting managing director, following the retirement of the managing director. Prior to this reconstitution of the board, there has been concerns about the performance of the parastatal. The local community where the organization's main operational activity is situated has threatened a protest against the parastatal before the change in management. The new management is in considering, the new management in consideration of the need to ensure a cordial working environment has held a press conference where the objective was to assuage the concerns of the community. The new management team further started a process of addressing the issues. Part of the steps taken is to initiate a process of finding out the issues with the parastatal and its performance. And you have proposed a value for money review required. Prepare a guide for the evaluation of the performance of a parastatal by looking at the key components of the value for money engagement, given the objectives and measures of the components. You should also include a description of the approach expected to be adopted by the practitioner, 12.5 marks. B, discuss the distinct features of the value for money review engagement as contained in the International Framework for Assurance Engagements, 7.5 marks, 20 marks. All right, so we have a question that tests the critical area of public sector like we looked at, and also specialized assurance. The public sector talks about value for money audit, which is generally and predominantly an activity in public sector audits. and also the fundamental rules governing all assurance services, the ISAE framework, and the general observations on the question is that the value for money audit in the public sector context, like a government parastatal, and the international framework for assurance engagement were linked together. So in that section, under public sector audits, we looked at value for money, even though it was brief, but then we need to speak to what this question, or in my opinion, it's an easy question if you understand the concepts, to pick 20 marks very easily. Just the B part may be a bit technical. So, and I think the question focused the part A on structuring the value for money audit concept around the 3 E's into an evaluative guide, and also including objectives and measures. Actually, it's a practical application-based question common in the AAAF paper. And the B part requires recalling the distinct features of assurance engagements, talking about attestation versus direct, reasonable, limited assurance as defined by the ISAE, and also linking value for money to that framework. So if we look at the answer actually in the Pathfinder is good. It clearly defines value for money, breaks down the 3 E's with their respective objectives and measurements, and outlines the practical audit approach. And for the B part, it correctly, I think the B part correctly also identifies the key international framework for assurance engagement. It provides and identifies the key distinctions. So the examiner, what was his report? What did he say? Okay, wow, poor performance. Okay, so he highlighted the poor application to the link, so that culminated in poor performance, poor application of the link to the scenario, and poor knowledge of the international framework for assurance engagements. Okay, so please, we must mention the parastatal community concerns as the reason for initiating the value for money audit, which was part of what he's complaining about candidates missed, and also justify the focus on effectiveness. Effectiveness generally talks about achieving desired objectives like community harmony, something like that. Okay, so let's speak to the question. How do we write such a question? In answering such a question, the prompt asks us to prepare a guide for the A part, for the evaluation, okay, and B part asks us to discuss the distinctive features. All right, so following the requirement, we need to define value for money audit and state the overall objectives. The overall objective actually for value for money audit is to assess if resources are used optimally to achieve the parastatal's objective. So take note of that, to assess if resources are used optimally, optimum use of resources to achieve the parastatal's objective. So a short, how to structure that definition, just a short introductory paragraph will suffice. And for the value for money components, clearly state the 3 E's. Clearly states a 3 E's as the components of the guide. So use clear subheadings: 1 for economy, 2 for efficiency, and 3 for effectiveness. Structure is king. Don't forget. Don't write shabbily without any delineation and differentiation of your answers. So please follow this structure clearly so that you end the mark seamlessly. Make it easy for your script to be marked. And the objectives and measures. So for each E, provide one definition objective. So the first E is economy means doing it cheaply, and efficiency talks about comparing the money spent with the inputs achieved, something like that. So structure or present the 3 E's in a table format if you want. And if you don't, okay, like you can see here, you can do it in table format. You can see, and if you don't want to, just state it clearly in each sentence, but delineate them. But I think this table format should do to present your answer clearly, to end out your marks seamlessly. So For the table, make it clear and very easy to mark. So anywhere tables provide a more clear picture of what you're trying to communicate, please use the table appropriately. Then the approach and methodology is to outline the steps the practitioner should take to execute the value for money review. So, for example, establishing measures, gathering data, comparison and benchmarking, concluding and recommending improvement, something like that. So, use numbered list or bullet points for the 4 key approach elements. Yeah, so to approach, so use numbered list or bullet points to make sure you differentiate your answers. Don't write sporadically full or long sentences that examiners are struggling to find your points. So numbered list will help keep those points very clear and succinct for marking. Don't forget, you are not writing to yourself, you are writing for the examiner to mark you. Please take note of that. Then for the B part, talking about distinctive features and half marks, the International Framework for Assurance Engagement Distinction, you need to think around what to write. You need to identify the 2 major distinction pairs made by the framework. The first one is attestation. I think we've looked at that in the first chapter. Attestation versus direct engagements. Value for money is often a direct engagement. And secondly, the reasonable versus limited assurance. So in structuring your answer, use bold text and numbered points or numbered list to provide this. So your numbering and your bullet or your bulleted list, any way you want to put it, should present your answers clearly and exclusively. So for the assurance levels, explain the meaning and risk level associated with reasonable assurance, talking about the high, positive, or conclusion. And for limited assurance, the moderate, negative conclusion should be included in your answer. So structure it and use dedicated separate bullet list or numbered list for each level. Yes, please, Grace. Your hand is up.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon and welcome.
Yes, sir. This last part of the question.
Yeah.
Question 1A.
B part. 1B.
B part. So A
Yes.
part, the last part said we should also include a description of the approach expected to be adopted by the practitioner. And you said this value for money audit is a direct audit. So I was expecting us to like mention things like audit approach now. But you mentioned something else. Why? What makes this one different from the normal audit approach, risk-based, substantive test? All those, are they not approaches to audit?
Okay, thank you very much.
Audit. What's the difference between that one and this one? And they are all approach to direct audit.
Yeah, good question. Good question. So you will generally understand that for government parastatals, the audit approach is generally different. And that is why when we're looking at the parastatal, we spoke to the fact that the approach may not necessarily be the substantive, statement of financial position approach, system-based approach, the statement of financial position approach. So all those approaches are generally and predominantly used for public systems, the private sector. So the public sector has its separate approach, and that was why those approaches came, and you didn't hear anything on government when we're talking about business risk, because generally the objective of a business is to make profit. So private companies are essentially or primarily into business for profit, but for the public is to provide essential services to the public. So the approaches are different, and that is why to perform the value for money and every other audits in the public space, you need to be particular, and the substantive system-based SFP approach will not suffice here. And you see that those approaches are more rigorous around private sectors, but the public has a different approach. So if you look at the structure of the lectures, you see that public sector unit in the I Can't Study text or the summary we provided in the slides did not give us any approach around the private one we spoke about. So in answering your question succinctly, they are not the same approach. They are different approach. This one is a little bit more I would say not tightened approach like it is for businesses that are into profit maximization. So that's why it's good to have these kind of questions and you understand which approach to use when a public sector question is tested and a private sector question is tested. So the private sector questions look around listed companies, public interest entities, and small businesses. Then for the government entity, the approach is around operations, investigations, value for money audit, and some general approaches that we'll be speaking to in this question. So they are not the same. And thank you for answering that question. They are not the same approaches. All right, Grace, are you okay with that brief explanation?
Yes, I'm surprised I'm knowing this for the first time.
Yes, and it's good you know it so that a question doesn't show up like this and you're wondering SFP, substantive. Yeah, so the public sector approaches are different from the private. So take note of that. Then we also have PPPs. There are some government entities that work as private public partnerships. So where you have PPPs, be careful with such a question. If the question is really private driven, then you use either the SFP, the substantive, or the system-based approach. But if it's public driven, because in the last space, the healthcare where I work is a private public space. So we are more of private because it's the business or the profit of the business that runs the company. So in that PPP provision, private public partnership, the private approach is what we use for such for such space or healthcare company I work for. But in a fully public space, you don't use the business risk or the financial statement risk approach in addressing the risks around such businesses. So take note of that. There's private, there's public, and there's PPP. So depending on the question, you know how to address them. Thank you for bringing that to the fore. It's a good question. Very good question. Okay, so back to my thoughts on the B part. I was talking about the assurance levels, and I was saying in defining assurance level, we know the absolute assurance is not possible. You can only provide reasonable or limited assurance. And I was talking about structuring your answers. And I said you also need to explain why absolute assurance cannot be given. Based on these answers here, you also need to state why absolute assurance cannot be given. Did he state it in his answer? I think he did not state it in his answer. Okay, but then if you inject absolute assurance in your conversation, maybe in 1 or 2, 3 lines, it won't be out of place to say that absolute assurance cannot be given, only reasonable assurance and all that. It's fine then. For general strategies for earning marks, so please take note. Or let's look at the marking guide before we talk about the general strategies. The marking guide has provided that for definition of value for money audit, we have 1 mark. So try to state the value for money audit. So what is value for money audit? Like we said in the lectures, we said is the optimal use of resources to achieve intended outcomes. Particularly in the public sector, value for money audit is used, not in private. Then the identification based on this marking key of the 3 E's. We have 1.5 mark or 1.5 mark. So try to list all the 3: economy, efficiency, effectiveness. So that's 0.5 mark each for identifying those E's. Then explanation and objective of the 3 E's is 3 marks. So explain what each means. Economy talks about inputs at lowest cost. Efficiency talks about maximizing outputs from inputs. Then effectiveness talks about achieving desired objectives or impact. So the purpose for value for money audit is 1 mark. So what is the purpose of value for money audit is to investigate a particular operation and conclude whether the entity is obtaining optimal value for money. That's a brief purpose of value for money. So the table and the meaning of measurement or meaning and measurement is 3 marks. So ensure the measurement for each E is distinct or delineated. So economy talks about cost, input comparison. Economy talks about input output ratio. Then effectiveness talks about output objective comparison, something like that. Then for the practitioner's approach, any 3 points as listed will give you 3 marks. So focus on the methodology. Number 1, the first method is to identify and develop measures, KPIs, benchmarks for the 3 E's. Then number 2 is establish a basis for comparison. The basis comparison could be a budget, prior year results, peer benchmarking, something like that. And 3, gather evidence and conclude on whether the value for money audit is achieved. Then 4, make recommendations for improvement. So that's generally how you should be able to structure the A part of the question. Then for the B part, from the marking key, the B part, okay? So for the B part, the marking key, the framework distinction is 1 mark. So state the international framework for assurance engagement and distinguish between assurance and non-assurance engagement. That shouldn't be an issue. And if you have issues with it, still practice and resolidify your concepts of this. Then talking about attestation versus direct is 1 mark. So you need to explain the core difference. Talking about attestation reviews a attestation. Try to remember. Okay, attestation reviews a subject matter prepared by a third party. Yes, that's what we said in chapter 1. So, for example, financial statements. So, attestation reviews a subject matter prepared by a third party. Then, direct reviews is a subject matter evaluated by the practitioner. So, value for money is often a direct review as the practitioner sets the criteria, something like that. So, read through the answers, try to memorize and also understand if you've forgotten chapter 1 at this point. And for assurance levels, the marking guide is 2 marks. Okay. So identify the 2 assurance levels. Talking about reasonable assurance is a high level and limited assurance is a moderate level assurance. Then the explanation of absolute assurance is 0.5 marks. So state that absolute assurance is not possible. We all know that due to limitations like non-sampling risk, professional judgment, lack of precision on or in the subject matter, something like that. So we know assurance is not possible in audit. So you could state that for half mark. Then for the position level explanation, you can see it's 2 marks. Okay, position level is 2 marks. Reasonable talks about expressing a positive opinion. So, for example, the financial statements, in our opinion, are true and fair. Then the limited assurance talks about an expression as a negative conclusion, saying something like, nothing has come to our attention that. So, phrases like that. So, you can explain that position level and give such brief explanation. So, the strategy actually for earning marks for the non-assurance engagements talks about listing examples like agreed upon procedures, compilation engagements, consulting. So those examples could give you 1 mark as stated in the marking guide. So let's be guided as we read through and practice with these answers. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? So before we go on break, let's look at the last question in that November 2024. If we don't have any questions or contributions, let's look at the question on November 2024. I think that will be the last one that tested chapter 7, planning expressly. Okay, so let's look at question 6A, Mr. Sokenu Talabi. And the question tested the audit risk model. Okay, so the question reads, Mr. Sokenu Talabi operates under the name TST General Importers Limited. Mr. Sokenu Talabi imports and sells anything viable for him in the country. With the connivance of some officials, he gets some foreign exchange and buys others from the Bureau de Change. Due to the mix of the sources of forex for imports or import, the business of Mr. Sokenu makes superfluous profit. The mix of forex sources has also led to the non-disclosure of some business activities in the company records. Mr. Talabi is a popular socialite and a philanthropist with friends in most of the government and regulatory agencies he does businesses with. The company's tax is prepared most of the time based on the activities involved or involving the foreign exchange from the official channel. The company's financial statements are audited by a sole practitioner who is Mr. Talabi's club member. Most of the staff of the audit firm are unqualified accountants, and documentation is usually minimal. Mr. Talabi uses his influence to negotiate and resolve any issues with regulatory agencies. Based on the advice of his doctors, Mr. Talabi is slowing down on activities and wants to hand over to the first son of his second wife, who appears more focused and organized. The firm has been approached to take over the audit due to the need to establish the real state of the business. Required, discuss the components of the audit risk model that are likely to be present in the audit of the company. 10 marks. Okay, so this is a classic question. It's a practical one that tests our ability to apply the foundational audit risk model, ISA 200. And we looked at that in the lectures, practically to a complex, the audit risk model. We need to apply it to a complex high risk reward scenario like we've seen in this question. And we need to, a 10-mark question is actually much. So the topic is actually audit risk model, and its component we know is inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, like we looked at practically. And the question focused on identifying the specific factors in this company's scenario that increase each risk component. And the core risks revolves around the complexity, illegality of forex sourcing, poor governance, control environment. So in looking at the answer, actually the Pathfinder has given us a good model and provided us with the console. So crucially, the answer links each component directly back to the facts in the scenario. We should take note of it, which is essentially for earning application marks, and that is essential for the AAAF paper. You need to link it back to the scenario to earn the marks, application marks. I call them application marks, very key. Okay, so looking at the examiner's report, he said performance was average, and the examiner emphasized the inability to decipher and justify the risk elements in the background. So this confirms that simply defining inherent risk, control risk, detection risk is insufficient. You must explicitly state why the forex mix or the club member auditor makes inherent risk or detection risk high. So take note of that in the examiner's report. Okay, so let's look at what to write and how to write such an answer. Okay, so start with an introduction. Define audit risk, which is the risk of issuing an inappropriate opinion. That's what audit risk is, and state the formula, like we've seen. In structure, what to write or how to write. How do we write? What to write is you need to define for the introduction. That's what to write. And how to write it, start with a single strong sentence defining audit risk, then follow it by the formula. Simple. Then for the inherent risk, define inherent risk, link it to the scenario factors that makes errors likely before controls. So inherent risk is first the risk before control. So an example in the scenario is superfluous profit from the complex forex mix is an inherent risk. The non-disclosure of business activities, inherent risk. Potential issues with related party, related disclosure due to Mr. Talabi's socialite status. These are all inherent risks. So use dedicated subheading. State inherent risk is high. Use bulleted points to list specific justifications from the case like I've listed. Take note of that. Then control risk. Link it to factors that makes controls ineffective or non-existent, like non-disclosure of activities. Management override is a control risk, high one. Tax manipulations, controls focused on official channel only, and the general expectation that internal controls are weak to accommodate Mr. Talabi's styles should speak to your thoughts around control risk. So use a dedicated subheading as you've done for inherent risk. Use that for control risk. State control risk is very high. So use bulleted points for these specific justifications to answer that area. You can see how the examiner has stated it. So please do that expressly and follow this same format. Okay. Then for detection risk. define detection risk, and link it to the factors that make the audit procedures ineffective. For example, lack of independence. The club member auditor is a detection risk. Poor audit quality, unqualified staff, like we saw in the case, and also minimal documentation are all detection risk. So use dedicated header to state detection risk must be low. So use dedicated subheader, state from the case. I think detection risk must be low because control and inherent risk are high. So definitely the detection risk is low based on what we looked at in the class. And it requires more testing, or if the audit firm's quality is poor, that it's likely to be high in reality. So focus on how the new firm must reduce detection risk by increasing substantive testing, substantive work. So conclusively, you should briefly explain the inverse relationship. Since inherent and control risk are high, don't forget the auditor must set detection risk to be low to achieve an overall audit risk. But when inherent risk and control risk are low, the auditor must set the detection risk to be high. So a concluding statement or paragraph summarizing the overall approach will close out your explanation on that. So read through the answers, try to solidify your understanding of this concept. In case a question comes like this and you want to choose it, please ensure you understand this model and how to explain it with a scenario. It's very important. So practice with this question, please, and you'll be glad you did. So let's look at the marking key. And the marking key gave us discussion and definition and discussion of the model is 2 marks. So state the audit risk definition, which is the risk of an inappropriate opinion, and also state the formula. You get 1 mark for that. The inherent risk is 2 marks. Define inherent risk as the risk of misstatement before considering internal controls. Don't forget that. Justify in the scenario the high inherent risk, like I said, complex unusual transactions involving mix of official bureau de change forex and related non-disclosures, superfluous profit, all are there, inherent risk. Number 2, management integrity, ethical risk. The intentional non-disclosure of business activities implies a high risk of misstatement due to management bias and fraud. Is there inherent risk? So you state them to pick 2 marks. Then for the control risk is also 2 marks. Define control risk as risk that misstatement won't be prevented or detected by the internal control system. Excuse me. Excuse me. So we said control risk that misstatement won't be prevented or detected by the internal control system is what control risk is all about. So from the case, justify the high control risk. Number 1, you have management override. Mr. Talabi's influence, his intentional non-disclosure suggests controls are bypassed. You'll see that from the case. Number 2 is the weak environment. Tax reporting based only on official channels shows a failure to record activities properly. Those are control risks. Excuse me. Then for the detection risk, 2 marks. Define risk that the auditor's procedure will not detect a misstatement. So justify high detection risk of the previous auditor or what the new audit firm must combat or fight. Number 1, lack of auditor competence and independence. Previous auditor was a club member and staff are unqualified, leading to ineffective testing. Number 2, poor documentation. Minimal documentation increases the risk that necessary evidence was not obtained or reviewed. So the overall audit risk relationship and the action is another 2 marks, especially that since, like I said earlier, inherent and control risk are assessed as high, the auditor must compensate by setting detection risk to a low level. This requires increasing the nature, extent, and timing of substantive testing for this high-risk club. Okay. All right. Okay, Grace. Yeah, go ahead. Your hand is up. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. Please, this 4th paragraph that says Mr. Tekenu Talabib is a popular socialite and a philanthropist with friends in most of the government and regulatory agencies he does business with. Is this a risk? Is this a potential risk? If yes, which of the categories do we place it?
Inherent risk. Inherent. It's a risk.
That
Yes,
he
it is
has
a risk. Yes. is actually a risk in the sense that he has friends he's using to circumnavigate the system, to bypass controls and some other, just to get favors for himself. Yes, regulatory. So it's a risk. So you can put it as inherent before any controls. So that's an inherent risk if you want to state it as part of it. Though in the answer, it was not stated as a risk, but under exam condition, if you want to put it under the risk, it's okay. It's an inherent risk. Are you okay with that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. You're welcome. Okay. So that's it for that question. And I believe we are getting some points and how to address them practically. Okay. So it's 5:01. Attention span is actually very low when you go above an hour. I don't know for some others, but if I do reading 1 hour, I normally take a break because I may start getting distracted. I will not get the output of what I want. So let's stop here.